Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good day to all. So today or now I will be discussing with you on writing a research proposal. So before that, let me introduce myself. So my name is Dr. Amir Afif Muhammad and currently I am the Deputy Dean for Research and Innovation for Faculty of Business and Management. Previously, I was the head of department for postgraduate and professional studies for the same faculty. Means that for the last 2 years, I was closely working with postgraduate students. I mean, those who are like you now, and I was assisting them in their study in the sense of developing and preparing workshop for them, giving advice, helping and advising them for Viva session, DRP, so on and so forth. In other words, you are very close to my heart. So to some extent, I'm also having some sort of familiarity with what you are currently faced right now. So some brief information about myself. Currently, I am the principal investigator for NAPRED grant, okay, on WACAF, and I'm a member of Transdisciplinary Research Grant Scheme (TRGS). And other roles, I'm external reviewer for Malaysian Palm Oil Board, and also executive editor and also member of advisory board for a few journals in Malaysia and also in Indonesia. And I have numerous article publication. And you can see my research kit and also Google Scholar link if you want to find out more about my research interests. Okay, now we proceed on the outline for writing a research proposal. So I have prepared a presentation that you can see right now. So I have used a layman words for this presentation in the sense that it's not very jargon and technical. So the outline for today, we'll start with introduction, and then for research proposal in general, commonly we have three main chapters, which are chapter 1, chapter 2, as well as chapter 3. And I've also include here sample of DRP assessment sample of DRP assessment form, so that we can together check through what are the essential criteria that you need to focus on when developing your research proposal and what you will be examined by your examiners, particularly for your research proposal. Okay, now why research proposal is important? That is a very pertinent question that you need to ask yourself. So research proposal is important because it reflects your understanding on the topic. It reflects the student understanding on the topic, on the study that you are actually working on. Okay, so if your research proposal is not solid, if the writing is not very clear, then the readers, especially the examiners, and also those who are interested with your study, then they might not be able to understand what you are working on. So it is really a waste of time. It is really a frustration, not only to yourself, but to your supervisors as well as to your loved ones, because lots of time has been spent on this. So therefore, it is essential to ensure the research proposal is really solid and properly written as what been required in the academic writing. And research proposal also confirms that your area of research is yet to be explored. So hence we are focusing on the research gap. Okay, so when you develop your research proposal, you are actually working on the research gap and you are trying to address the research gap. Next would be in terms of the methodology. So in your proposal, chapter 3 will be discussing on the methodology. So the methodology must be appropriately developed. If the methodology is weak, then you will be questioned a lot by the panels. Hence, most probably you will be facing with major correction, which means that you need to read the RP again, or maybe you need to submit a new or fresh proposal. I pray that every one of you won't be in that kind of situation. Okay, apart from that, research proposal is important because it can be transformed into journal article. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, in a proposal, you will be covering chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3, which means you actually have written a lot. So therefore, it can be transformed into journal article. And remember, for MSc student, you need to have one article publication, and for PhD student, you need to have two articles publication in index journal or selected my site journal according to the faculty. Okay, for my site journal, faculty have addressed a selected journals that you can submit for. So you need to ask your faculty or ask the coordinator of the faculty on what are the right journal for you to submit. And last but not least, a good research proposal can be used to apply for research grant. So this is, to me, is equivalent important in the sense that if you want to go for a conference, international conference overseas, or you want to submit to index journal that require payment, so if you get the research grant, then that would really helpful. So these are the reasons why your research proposal is important. Hence, to develop or construct a very good research proposal is very essential. So now we look, or we discuss on chapter 1. Okay, so in general, these are the common items that will be focused in chapter 1. First will be the preamble or introduction. So what's the difference between preamble and introduction? Basically, it is similar thing, but this is my personal observation. In a qualitative study, normally they would love to use preamble instead of introduction. Okay, and for quantitative study, introduction is quite common, but from the language perspective, it means the same thing. And then followed with to background of study, problem statement, research questions, research objective, scope of study, significance of study, limitation of your study, definition of terms, and then organization of study, as well as conclusion. So these are the common items, common sections in chapter 1. Alright, for background of study, actually this particular section provides a scene setting about the study that you are going to investigate. Scene setting here is very important to ensure the examiners as well as the readers understand the area or the industry or maybe the companies that you are currently working on. Okay, scene setting provide the information on the area that you are currently working on. For example, if you are doing research on enterprise risk management adoption in Sharia compliant construction companies in Malaysia, so perhaps your background of study are about enterprise risk management and also why it is being applied to construction companies in Malaysia and how many construction companies in Malaysia And how do you determine whether the company is Sharia compliant construction companies or not? So those are amongst the example of background of study. Second, perhaps maybe another example is perception of parents on school activities during the COVID-19. So this is the current phenomena. So I hope everybody is safe since we are doing this workshop online. So perception of parents on school activities during this COVID-19 incident. So perhaps for this kind of study, so for the background of the study, so you need to discuss on what is COVID-19 and how does it being uh, developed from one country to another, and then in the context of Malaysia, the current situation, as well as a bit information on school activities and also about the parents' concern on this particular issue. So study setting or background of study need to be general, but at the same time, it it should provide understanding to the examiners or readers why you choose this particular industry or area. Next, another component is a problem statement. So the problem statement is critical because this is the part where examiners normally will be assessing very closely. So it is important for this particular section, for this particular discussion, you need to highlight or emphasize the agency, the element of agency, why you conduct the study. It means that when the readers read your proposal and when they arrive at this particular section, which is problem statement, then they can feel that your study is really contemporary. Your study is really relevant with the current situation. So they can feel the urgency. In other words, why you conduct the study? Because you want to address a certain particular issue, which is very urgent or contemporary to be solved. Therefore, current situation about the problem is required to be discussed here. And in this particular section also, the research gap needs to be highlighted. The research gap here means that what are the area, what are the problem that you are actually trying to address or trying to explore further. Now, the next question is, what are the common mistakes for problem statement? So, what are the common mistakes regarding problem statement? So, previous students that I have come across, normally they write the problem statement in a lengthy manner, means that they do not focus on what are the real issue, on what are the gap that they are trying to investigate. So they keep on writing and the focus is not there. So this will be a concern to the examiners. Second, sometimes or some students, they join together problem statement into background of study. So this is really not right, because background of study is actually discussed on the scene setting about your research, whereas problem statement is actually focusing more on the current issue that you are currently working on. As I mentioned earlier, it needs to have the element of urgency. Why you really need to conduct this study in the first place. Next section is on research questions. Well, in terms of order or sequence, some books put a research objective first and research questions later. And some supervisors, which I know, they prefer to have research question earlier and then followed by research objective. So for this particular part, you need to discuss with your supervisors. Nevertheless, for research question section, basically this section provide you a set of broad research questions or RQ, and these research questions must be answered at the end of your study based on the finding that you have derived. In other words, the research questions here are actually purposeful, means that it has meaning. So when you develop the research question should be able to guide your research, to guide your study, so that your study will be always on the right track. Because at the end of the research, at the end of your study, you need to ensure these research questions are answered. And commonly for quantitative study, you will use a lot of why when developing the research question, whereas for qualitative study, focus would be on what and how when developing the research questions. Okay, next will be section on research objective. So there are various school of thoughts in terms of how to develop this research objective. So some will have a broad, um some will have a broad definition on research objective, whereas there's another school of thought that will divide the research objective into general research objective and also specific research objective. The objective of the study should be clearly stated and be specific in nature. And each objective should emphasize only one particular issue. And it is advisable for you to use the action-oriented verb such as to determine, to find out, or to ascertain when developing the research objective. In qualitative studies, the statement of objective is not as precise as in quantitative studies. Normally, for qualitative studies, you would simply mention the overall objective of your study, because commonly for qualitative you are trying to explore the situation as long as possible. So research objective is very important because it guides your research and it is the aim that your research trying to achieve. An interesting question is that what will happen if the RO or the research objective is not achieved? So what will happen if this situation occur? Well, because research is very dynamic, so normally at the end of your study, if your result does not consistent with your research objective, then you will somewhat change or modify your research objective, and this will also will influence on how you write your literature review. In other words, yes, your research objective can be changed, however it will also influence the other chapter in your thesis. But for proposal part, it is sufficient for you to develop a very clear research objective so that the examiners or the readers, once they read about it, then they will know what you are trying to focus on. Next is on scope of study. So scope of study basically is setting up the parameter for your particular research. For example, if the scope of your study is about the SMEs in Klang Valley and focusing on women workforce. So if you are doing on this particular type of research, so SMEs are your unit analysis and you are focusing on the women workforce. So basically those are the parameter that you have set for your particular study. Whereas on another example, if you study focusing on Islamic banks profitability in Indonesia, so that is your scope of study. It means that you have limit your study only for Islamic banks and looking on the profitability of the Islamic banks in Indonesia. So basically that is your parameter. So if the examiner or the reader read on this particular part, then they will know what you are actually focusing on. Another aspect or section is about the significance of study. Well, significance of study is important because this is the part that you convey the importance of your study to others. Means that you are trying to inform other people why you conduct the study and how your study can contribute. And it is suggested for you to break down the importance of your study into contribution towards the community, contribution that your study can give to the policymakers, to the body of knowledge, as well as to the industry. Well, maybe your study won't contribute much to all of stakeholders that I just mentioned, but it is for sure that your study will contribute to the body of knowledge. That is something you should include for. Next part is about the limitation of your study. So for limitation, when you develop the proposal, it is very common that every study has its own limitation. I mean, that is fact. No one is perfect. No study is perfect. So limitation is actually exist. So what you need to do is that you need to describe, you need to inform in your research proposal what are the limitations that your study will face, and such limitation can comes from the method that you use, geographical issue, as well as the respondents or interviewee if you are actually adopting the interview. So method use, for example, if you doing something on a questionnaire, I mean if you're using questionnaire, then respondents will be a limitation in the sense that they might not understand, they might simply answer. So those must be informed in your proposal, and you need to have strategy on how to overcome such limitation. For example, when we talk about respondents, so maybe face to face is a good uh, tool when you want to disseminate your survey. So by having face to face, then you can perhaps explain to the respondents on the questionnaire if the respondents do not understand. Whereby, for example, method use. So let's say if you are doing something, sorry, if you are doing research on panel data, so maybe there are certain years that you do not get the data. So you need to explain on how are you going to address this particular issue. So basically limitation is exists in every study. So what you need to do is you need to explain what are the limitations and how to overcome those limitations. And next sections will be definition of terms, followed by organization of the study, and also conclusion. So definition of terms, basically, if you have acronym that you are heavily used in your proposal, in your research, so you need to have that. And then in organization of the study section, you need to inform the flows of chapters and sections in the proposal from chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3, and what are the section in every chapter, and how does the flow or the discussion will be made. And last but not least, in chapter 1, you will have the conclusion. So this section will provide summary about the whole discussion in chapter 1. Okay, let's proceed to the second chapter. So second chapter will be discussing on the literature review, or normally we call it as the LR chapter. So in this particular chapter, what you need to focus on is that you need to review the past studies in depth. So what is the purpose of having literature review? So basically, you want to understand the previous issues that previous researchers have gone through. Then you want to identify their findings as well as the method that they use in their study. So if you have done enough literature review, then subsequently or naturally it will lead you to the research gap that you are actually trying to find. Remember, without the research gap, then there will be no contribution. And without the contribution, your study will be somewhat meaningless because you have spent a lot of time, effort, money as well on this particular journey or research. So that's why the literature review or the LR chapter is very, very important. And in this particular chapter also, theories or models that are relevant to your study will be presented and discussed in this particular chapter. So when you write the literature review, you need to ensure that you engage critically with the previous studies and not merely reporting what the previous studies have done. So it means that you are not just informing what previous researchers did, but you should criticize, you should discuss in depth, you should suggest if it is relevant. Without doing that, then you actually does not really engage in terms of academic thinking. So that's why literature review is very, very important. And it will be followed by theoretical or conceptual framework. So this particular part will be discussed in chapter 2. So I know that it is quite confusing to some when we talk about theoretical or conceptual framework, but basically these are the two different things. So when we talk about theoretical framework, it is basically derived from the theories. So you will engage, you will explain on how this theory will be influence your study, whereby conceptual framework is basically what you are going to do in your research. So both are very, very important and will be examined closely by the examiners. And hypothesis also will be developed in this particular chapter. So you need to write down, you need to inform what are the hypotheses that are relevant or related to your study, and you will have your H null and also H alternative in this particular section. and it will be followed by the table of literature review or summary of LR table. Well, this is not really mandatory, but I would really advise you to have this table of LR because it will help the readers, it will help the examiners to check or to read on what are the literature review that you have done. And to some extent, this also will help you in your research process. And there's a software which is known as Atlas TI. I think some of you or most of you know this particular software. And Atlas TI is normally being used by the students or researcher in qualitative study, but it is also helpful if you want to use it for literature review purpose, even though you are not doing research on qualitative method. So perhaps you want to have a look on SSTI and see how does SSTI help you when developing the research proposal, particularly for the LR chapter. And there's another component which is known as SLR or systematic literature review, which can be also adopted by you. Well, it is slightly different from the conventional way of literature review because systematic literature review is or was actually developed by those who are doing research clinically, but it has now been accepted by many, including business management and also social science. So if you're doing this SLR, it is actually a system. You have the protocol that you need to follow, and this SLR will help you actually to ensure that you are not missing the relevant and critical previous study which is related to your particular research. So I would suggest you to go for workshop on SLR. Okay, if you look here, this is the example of LR table summary. This is actually done by my master students for their dissertation. So if you look there, then you can see the independent variables and then past studies that actually have discussed on this particular variables, and you can see the relationship which were found out in previous study, whether it is positive or negative. So this will help you when you want to present in front of the panel during the defense of research proposal session or DRP. Let's proceed. Okay, don't forget when you write your literature review, it is strongly suggested that you need to use the proper action words. I have come across many research proposals, I've come across many theses, and the way the student or even the researchers, when they develop or write the literature review, you can differentiate whether the researcher or the students are good or not in terms of writing. So here are the example of words that you can use when writing the research proposal. So if you want to dispute previous study, then you should look at the column number 4. So you can use the word contrast, you can use the word criticize, you can use the word defend. Okay, so these are the words that you should adopt when developing the research proposal, particularly when you write for your thesis, not only for literature review chapter but for your thesis. And then chapter 3. So this is the last chapter in research proposal. So there are many elements in chapter 3. For example, first, you need to identify what is your research paradigm? Is it positivism or is it interpretivism? Well, I really don't have enough time to explain on this, but normally positivism is related to quantitative study, whereas interpretism related to qualitative study. But to have good grasp on research paradigm is very important because it is actually the philosophical platform that you need to embrace when you engage in a research activity or research study. And as mentioned just now, or as I mentioned earlier, quantitative is related to why, whereas qualitative is related to what and how for you to solve the particular research question. And in this particular chapter 3 also, you will emphasize whether you are going to use primary or secondary data. Whereas primary is focused on questionnaire and interview, and secondary, for example, focus on panel data, time series, as well as document analysis. And if you are doing something on qualitative, even quantitative, you will be discussing in this particular chapter on your sampling, the sample size, as well as the measurement. And next, you will discuss clearly what are the method that you're going to use. And if you are adopting questionnaire, then you need to mention who are your respondent and why you choose them. This is also equally important if you are doing qualitative, for example interview. So you need to identify and inform in your proposal who are the key informants or the interviewees that you are going to engage in this particular study. And it is very important to write down or to inform the readers and as well as the examiners the reliability and validity of your study. So reliability concerned with the repetitiveness of the result when you replicate the study, whereby the validity is deal with how you're going to ensure that you will get the result which is intended. And then in this particular chapter also you will discuss on how are you going to analyze the data, what are the tests that you're going to use, and what are the criteria that you need to ensure you fulfill when you want to analyze the data. Next, it is advisable for you to have the milestone or Gantt chart so that the panels, the examiner knows your progress and what you are going to achieve. And it is also helpful to you to ensure that you are on track in your study. And it is very essential to ensure that in your methodology chapter or chapter 3, you should be able to inform that the data is available for your study, because for finance and economics especially, and even to others, panel will concern whether you will be able or not to collect the data for your study. Sometimes you can have a very good and nice chapter 1, a very clear writing of chapter 2, but when it comes to chapter 3, you cannot show the data is available, then your study will be asked to be reviewed by the panel, because without the data, then you cannot conduct and complete your study. And in this particular chapter also, in methodology chapter also, chapter 3, you need to discuss on what are the alternative method available and why you choose the method that you are going to adopt for your study. So why you choose that? Is it because of that particular method is relevant to your study, or is it because of your sample, or is it because of other criteria or constraint that you have to face? So you need to discuss on what are the alternative methods that are available and why you choose that particular method. Okay, so basically I have completed chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3 of research proposal, and I hope that to some extent I have been able to assist you on this particular part. And there are two things which I have not discussed earlier. First, about the title of the research as well as the abstract. So why I do not discuss this earlier? Because normally when we conduct research, we have a working title or a loose title, okay, so that we know what we are doing. But the complete title of your research normally will be finalized before you submit your research proposal for DRP session, or Defense of Research Proposal session. Because when you complete chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3, only then you will have a clear picture on what are the title of your research. Before that, you only have working title or loose title for you to work on. So when you develop your title, then you need to ensure that it should include the dependent variable, and if you have moderating or intervening variable, it must also being mentioned in your title. And you should mention generally of the independent variable. For example, if your study is something like this: determinants of profitability for Islamic banks in Malaysia. So determinants are actually the independent variable, and profitability is actually the dependent variable. So if you have moderating, for example, so the title might be somewhat like this. This is just example: determinants of profitability for Islamic banks in Malaysia, and assets as moderating factor, something like that. Okay, but that's not the very good research title, because it is very spontaneous for me. But what I'm trying to emphasize here is that if you have the moderating or intervening, then you need to mention that in your title. And normally it is advisable for you not to have a very long title. Normally 2 lines would be sufficient. And if you have moderating and intervening, which I have come across student who have that, then your topic naturally will become longer. But in general, you should have only 2 lines of title of research. And next is about the abstract. So abstract is also needed for proposal. So when you have the abstract, then the abstract should summarize your research proposal. Means that it should give conclusion from chapter 1 until chapter 3, and in that particular abstract it must present the issue that your study is working on, the method that your study will be adopting, as well as the limitation that your study needs to face. And you should be able to share with others keywords that reflect the key items of your research. And normally we have 5 to 7 keywords. So here I have example of DRP assessment form. And if you look here on the top of this form, then you can see that if you are master student, you need to present in your you need to present in your first semester or 6 months. If you are PhD, it is advisable for you to present in your second semester or 12 months of your study. Okay, number one here, if you look in the assessment form, title of research. So title of research will carry 5 marks. So as I mentioned earlier, you should be able to develop a good title of research when you have completed your chapter 1, chapter 2 and chapter 3. Then from there, with the advice of your supervisor, you will have a good title of research and it will carry 5 marks. Number 2, you will see that statement of problem or problem statement will carry 20% of marks during your DRP. So that's why I have mentioned earlier, having a clear, concise, and also solid problem statement is very important. So that's why you need to ensure you'll be able to show the urgency of your study in the problem statement section. So here 2A is about the analysis of the problem, 10%, and 2B is the rationale and also justification of your research gap. So make sure you do not lose mark here, because I'm sure the study that you are going to conduct soon would have very relevancy to the contemporary issue. Third is about the research objective and also research question, and here also carry 20% marks. So if you look here, the highest mark is 5. So your research objective and questions are described very clearly. 4 marks if your research objective and questions are described clearly, whereas 3 marks if your research objective and questions are described but moderately clear. So I hope I hope all of you will get at least 4 or 5 for this particular section. And then number 4, on literature review, hypothesis development, and also conceptual framework. So 20% also will be contributed from this particular section. So if you look there, 4A means able to organize different bodies of knowledge logically. 4B, propose research framework or the academic construct. So 4A, highest mark is 5, means that you are able to provide good evidence of well-organized and logical bodies of knowledge. So as I mentioned earlier, in your literature review, you should write it clearly and you should discuss and engage with the text academically and also in depth. So by doing that, then it will help you to get a very good mark for this particular section. And for 4B, the highest mark is 5 if you are able to provide a very clear research framework or academic construct. So this is very important. Naturally, if you have a very good literature review, if you write it properly, clearly, and also in depth, then you will have the good research framework. Number 5 is about the research methodology or the chapter 3, as I mentioned just now. So to get the 5 marks, you need to be able to clearly mention about the data collection method, and it must be in terms of the sampling that you propose should be very clear and also accurate, and the procedure and technique also must be relevant to your study, and here also will carry 20% marks, followed by significant value of the research. So significant value of the research will carry 50% marks. So this is where the chapter 1 is very important, and the significance value of your research also will somewhat relate to your problem statement, because the research gap will provide urgency, and from urgency we can see whether your research is having highly importance or not. So these are the references that you can find in the future if you want to check on. And before that, for the DRP result, you will have grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3. Grade 1 means that you pass with flying colors. Grade 2 means that you will have a minor correction. Grade 3 means that you have a major correction and you need to go for re-DRP. And last but not least, I forgot to mention just now, you have grade 4. So grade 4 means that you need to submit a new research proposal. So make sure all of you should target for grade 1 and grade 2. So thank you. That's all for this particular research proposal. And you can try to answer or to test yourself with the question that I have included here. So perhaps by answering this particular question, then you can somewhat test your understanding about this particular topic. Okay, with that, I hope every one of you will gain benefit from my session. And if you have question, then you can email me. So all the best to all of you, and I hope that all of you will get the GOT, graduate on time. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum and have a very good day.